Here we are, everybody. Why is it that makeup looks good when you look in the mirror after you do it, but then looking into a camera or something, it doesn't look good? I don't understand. Hello. Oh, I was saying that makeup looks good when you look into a mirror and stuff, but then when you look into a camera view of yourself, it doesn't look as good. And I don't understand how that happens. And thank you. Yeah, I tried. I definitely tried with the braid. Thank you. It's the way my Animal Crossing character is styled right now, so thank you. I'm very purple today. Sorry, I had to clear my throat. How is everybody today? And also thank you for the compliments. Well, then I'd better hurry up before I get taken to jail. Well, not exactly. It's just the style that my character, the hairstyle that my little character in there currently has. I'm very pale. Sorry, I just had a moment. Not a vampire. How am I a vampire? Where did this come from? Maybe some Halloween. My stream is... I know my stream. My mail is still open. Let me just close that. Yeah, it's this week for us. I feel like Thanksgiving time is just, it's like that. It's stressful. Yeah, it was funny because we were talking. So in my Korean class, there's somebody who lives in Toronto there, and my teacher was asking about that, and she's like, "Oh, so you don't have like any holiday coming up this week?" And then the girl was like, "It was Black Friday," but it was like, that's not a holiday. We have that too, but yeah, it's a little more like. I remember it was very controversial here because they had Black Friday basically starting on Thursdays at one point. I don't know who's like stuck to this, if it has been stuck to, but like basically you would have people working on Thanksgiving, or not even, I'm sorry, not yeah, I think it was, and it was like controversial because it was like it's Thanksgiving. Why is corporate stuff like trumping over our time together with our families? But that's Corporate America. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that we're actually closed. Like, my job is closed on Thursday. Now that I think about it, and Thursday, Friday. I have to double check. Which that'd be a nice little surprise. But yeah, so it was controversial over here because those take place like right. Why am I doing the finger hearts? I meant to say like that, like right on top of each other. And then yeah, Boxing Day. Is Boxing Day like the day after Christmas for you guys? Like I forget what Boxing Day is and when. Cool. Yeah. What is it though? Ignorant American asks. That's also problematic. Can we just like I mean, not sales, but like it being right after the holiday and then stressing people to like that yeah. Well, corporate Canada. Corporate America and corporate Canada. Yeah, my teacher was like, "Is anybody waiting for Black Friday?" And I was like, "Cyber Monday." Oh, really? I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. That's cool. Um okay, so we are like 100 pages to the end of um mm, I guess it would make sense. You get like the most bang for your buck at that point. Um but yeah, so we are 100 pages to the end of the book. So I'll go ahead and see if we can get like suggestions for the next poll that we do for our next book soon. So this way we can already have something lined up. I know a lot of you are saying that you would want to do Stardust, and I would love to read Stardust. I know. See, what did I say? um, so we'll see what happens, and maybe it will be Stardust. Stardust is a very nice story, and the wording is really, really nice. Okay, what is a suggestion for a book or a suggestion for like a practice? Oh, you for a book. That doesn't help. I can't do anything if you've forgotten the name. See, like it doesn't help if I know it, it means I probably read it, in which case it shouldn't be something we're doing on Wizard Detective. I don't know. I'm interested to hear. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and read. We are at the top of the 10th. I can't remember something like that though. Oh, okay. You both know it. Okay. We can add it to the list. Okay, for now, we Wizard Detective came up with it. For now, we can start with the next part of this book, which is top of the 7th. As twilight thickened toward true dark, Trisha came to a rocky open place that looked out over a small blue-shadowed valley. She surveyed this valley eagerly, hoping to see lights, but there were none. A loon cried from somewhere, and a crow called crossly back. That was all. She looked around and saw several low rock outcrops with drifts of pine needles lying between them like hammocks. Trisha put her pack down at the head of one of those, went to the nearest stand of pine, and broke off enough boughs to make a mattress. It would hardly be assert a perfect sleeper, but she thought it would do. The coming dark. Can you put like exact brand names in your like book like that? I mean, I guess it's fine, but it's kind of funny when it like gets so on the nose like that. Like, um, the coming dark brought on now familiar feelings of loneliness and sorrowful homesickness. But the worst of her terror was gone. Her sense of being watched had slipped away. If there really was a thing in the woods, it had gone off and left her to herself again. Trisha went back to the stream, knelt, drank. She had had little stomach cramps off and on all day, but she thought her body was adapting to the water nevertheless. No problem with the nuts and berries either, she said, then smiled, except for a few bad dreams and such. She went back to her pack, she went back to her pack in her makeshift bed, got her Walkman, and settled her earbuds into place. A breeze puffed by her, cold enough to chill her sweaty skin and make her shiver. Trisha dug out the ruins of her poncho and fluffed the dirty blue plastic over her like a blanket. Not much in the way of warmth, but this was one of Mom's. It's the thought that counts. She pushed the power button on the Walkman, but although she hadn't changed the tuner setting, tonight she got nothing but wavers of faint static. She had lost WCAS. Trisha worked her way across the FM dial. She got faint classical music up around 95 and a Bible thumper yelling about salvation at 99. Trisha was very interested in salvation, but not the kind the guy on the radio was talking about. The only help from the Lord she wanted right now was a helicopter filled with friendly waving people. She tuned further, got Celine Dion loud and clear at 104, hesitated, then kept on rolling the tuner. She wanted the Red Sox tonight, Joe and Troop, not Celine singing about how our heart would go on and on. No baseball on the FM. In fact, nothing else at all. Trisha switched to the AM band and tuned up toward 850, which was WEEI in Boston. EEI was the Red Sox flagship station. She didn't expect perfect reception or anything, but she was hopeful. You could pick up a lot of AM at night, and EEI had a strong signal. It would probably waver in and out, but she could put up with that. She didn't have a lot else to do tonight, no hot dates or anything. EEI's reception was good, clear as a bell, in fact, but Joe and Troop weren't on. In their place was one of the guys her dad called talk show idiots. This one was a sports talk show idiot. Could it be raining in Boston? Game canceled, empty seats, tarp on the field? Trisha looked doubtfully up at her piece of the sky, where the first stars were now shining like sequins on dark blue velvet. There would be a zillion of them before long. She couldn't see so much as a single cloud. Of course, she was 150 miles from Boston, maybe more, but the talk show idiot was on the line with Walt from Framingham. Walt was on his cat phone. Oh, sorry, his cat phone. Walt was on his car phone. When the talk show idiot asked where he was now, Walt from Framingham said, "Somewhere in Danvers, Mike," pronouncing the town's name as Massachusetts. Pronouncing the town's name as Massachusetts people all did, Danvers, making it sound like a town, but something you'd think to settle an upset tummy. Lost in the woods? Been drinking straight from the stream and shitting your brains out as a result? A tablespoon of Danvers and you'll feel better fast. Walt from Framingham wanted to know why Tom Gordon always pointed to the sky when he got a save. You know, Mike, that pointing thing, was how Walt put it. And Mike, the talk show sports idiot, explained it was number 36's way of thanking God. He had to point a finger to Joe Carrigan instead, Walt from Framingham said. It was Carrigan's idea to turn him into a closer. As a starter, he was for the birds, you know? Maybe God gave Kerrigan the idea. Did you ever think of that, Walt? The talk show idiot asked. Joe Kerrigan, being the Red Sox pitching coach, for those of you who might not know. I do know, numbwit, Trisha murmured impatiently. We're mostly talking Sox tonight, while the Sox enjoy a rare night off, said Mike, the talk show idiot. They open a 3-game set with Oakland tomorrow. Yes, West Coast, here we come, and you'll hear all of the action here on WEII. Sorry, on WEEI. But today is an open date. An open date, that explains it. Trisha felt an absurdly huge disappointment weigh on her. Weigh her down, and more tears, and damp as you called them teas, began to form in her eyes. She cried so easily now she cried over anything. But she had been looking forward to the game, damn it. Hadn't known how much she needed the voices of Joe Castiglione and Jerry Trupiano until she found out that she couldn't be hearing them. Found out that she wouldn't be hearing them. We've got some open lines, the talk show idiot said. Let's fill them up. Anyone out there think Mo Vaughn ought to stop acting like a kid and just sign on the dotted line? How much money does this guy need anyway? Good question, isn't it? It's a stupid question, El Dopo, Trisha said pettishly. If you could hit like Mo, you'd ask for a lot of money too. Want to talk about marvelous Pedro Martinez, Darren Lewis, the surprising Sox bullpen? A nice surprise from the Red Sox, can you believe it? Give me a call, tell me what you think. Back after this. A happy voice began singing a familiar jingle. Who do you call when your windshield's busted? 1-800-54-GIANT, Trisha said, and then dialed away from EEI. Maybe she could find another game. Even the hated Yankees would do. But before she found any baseball, she was transfixed by the sound of her own name. Is fading for 9-year-old Trisha McFarland, missing since Saturday morning. The news announcer's voice was faint, wavery, sliced and diced by static. Trisha leaned forward, her fingers going to her ears and pressing the little black buds deeper in. Connecticut law enforcement authorities, acting on a tip phoned into state police in Maine today, arrested Francis Raymond Mazzaroli of Weymouth, Massachusetts, and questioned him for 6 hours in connection with the McFarland girls' disappearance. Mazzaroli, a construction worker currently employed on a Hartford Bridge project, has twice been convicted of child molestation and is being held pending extradition to Maine on current charges of sexual assault and child molestation there. It now seems that he has no knowledge of Patricia McFarland's whereabouts, however. A source close to the investigation says that Mazzaroli claims to have been in Hartford over the past weekend and that numerous witnesses corroborate. The sound faded out. Trisha pushed the power button and pulled the earbuds out of her ears. Were they still looking for her? They probably were, but she had an idea that they'd spent most of the day hanging around that guy Mazzaroli instead. What a bunch of aldopos, she said disconsolately, and returned her Walkman to her pack. She lay back on the pine boughs, spread her poncho over her, then shuffled her shoulders and butt around until she was close to comfortable. A breeze puffed past, and she was glad she was in one of the hammocky dips between the rock outcrops. It was chilly tonight, and would probably be downright cold before the sun came up. Overhead in the black were zillion stars, just as forecast. Exactly 1 zillion. They would pale a bit when the moon rose, but for now they were bright enough to paint her dirty cheeks with frost. As always, Trisha wondered if any of those brilliant specks were warming other live beings. Were there jungles out there populated by fabulous alien animals, pyramids, kings and giants? Possibly even some version of baseball? Who do you call when your windshield's busted? Trisha sang softly, 1-800-54. She broke off, drawing swift breath in over her lower lip as if hurt. White fire scratched the sky as one of the stars fell. The streak ran halfway across the black and then winked out. Not a star, of course, not a real star, but a meteor. There was another, and then another. Trisha sat up, the split rags of her poncho falling in her lap, her eyes wide. Here was a fourth and a fifth. These going in a different direction. Not just a meteor, but a meteor shower. As if something had only been waiting for her to understand this, the sky lit up in a silent storm of bright contrails. Trisha stared, neck tilted, eyes wide, arms crossed over her breastless chest. All right. Hands clutching her shoulders with nervous nail-bitten fingers. Okay. She had never seen anything like it, never dreamed there could be anything like it. Oh, Tom, she whispered in a trembling voice. Oh, Tom, look at this. You see? Most were momentary white flashes, thin in starlight and gone so quickly that they would have seemed like hallucinations if there hadn't been so many of them. A few, however, 5, perhaps 8, lit up the sky like silent fireworks, brilliant stripes that seemed to burn orange at the edges. That orange might just have been eye dazzle, but Trisha didn't think so. At last, the shower began to wane. Trisha lay back again and scooted the various sore parts of her body around more until she was comfortable again. As comfortable as she was apt to get, anyway. As she did, she watched the ever more occasional flashes as bits of rock further off the path than she could ever get dropped into Earth's well of gravity, first turning red as the atmosphere thickened, and then burning to death in brief glares of light. Trisha was still watching when she fell asleep. Her dreams were vivid but fragmentary, a kind of mental meteor shower. The only one she remembered with any clarity was the one she had been having just before she woke up in the middle of the night, coughing and cold, lying on her side with her knees drawn all the way up to her chin and shivering all over. In this dream, she and Tom Gordon were in an old meadow, which was now running to bushes and young trees, mostly birches. Tom was standing by a splintery post that came up to about the height of his hip. On top of it was an old ringbolt, rusty red. Tom was flicking this back and forth between his fingers. He was wearing his warm-up jacket over his uniform, the gray road uniform. He would be in Oakland tonight. She had asked Tom about that Poynton thing. She knew, of course, but she asked anyway. Possibly because Walt from Framingham, Walt from Framingham had wanted to know, and a cellular El Dopo like Walt wouldn't believe any little girl lost in the woods. Walt would want it straight from the closer's mouth. I point because it's God's nature to come on in the bottom of the ninth, Tom said. He spun the ring bolt on top of the black post and forth between. Sorry. He spun the ring bolt on top of the post back and forth between his fingers. Back and forth, back and forth. Who do you call when your ring bolt's busted? Dial 1-800-54-RING-BOLT, of course. Especially when the bases are loaded and there's only one out. Something in the woods chattered at that, perhaps in derision. The chattering grew louder and louder until Trisha opened her eyes in the dark and realized that it was the sound of her own teeth. She got slowly to her feet, wincing as every part of her body protested. Her legs were the worst, closely followed by her back. A gust of wind struck her, not a puff this time, but a gust, and almost knocked her over. She wondered how much weight she had lost. A week of this and you'd be able to put a string around me and fly me like a kite, she thought. She started to laugh at that, and the laugh turned into another coughing fit. She stood with her hands planted on her legs, just above her knees, her head down, coughing. The cough started deep in her chest and came out of her mouth in a series of harsh barks. Great. Just great. She put the inside of her wrist to her forehead and couldn't tell if she had a fever or not. Walking slowly with her legs spread far apart, her butt chafed less when she did that. Trisha went back to the pines and broke off more branches, this time meaning to pile them on top of her like blankets. She took one armload back to her bed, got a second, and stopped halfway between the trees and the needle-floored dip she'd chosen to sleep in. Slowly, she turned in a complete circle under the blazing 4 o'clock stars. "Leave me alone, can't you?" she cried, and that started her coughing again. When she got the cough under control, she said it again, but in a lower voice. "Can't you quit it? Can't you just cut me a break? Let me be?" Nothing. No sound but the soughing of the wind through the pines. And then a grunt. Low and soft and not even remotely human. Trisha stood where she was with her arms around her fragrant, sappy load of branches. Her skin broke out in hard little bumps. Where had that grunt come from? Where had that grunt come from? This side of the stream? The other side? From the side of the stand of pines? She had a horrible idea, almost a certainty that it was the pines. The thing which had been watching her was in the pines. As she harvested branches to cover herself with. Its face had been perhaps less than 3 feet from her own. Its claws, the ones which had torn into the trees and ripped both deer apart, had perhaps hovered within inches of her own hands as she bent the branches back and forth, first splintering them and then breaking them. Trisha started coughing again, and that got her moving. She dropped the branches in a helter-skelter pile and crawled among them without any attempt to create order out of their jumbled chaos. She winced and moaned a little when one of them poked the place on her hip where she had been stung, then lay still. She sensed it coming now, slipping out of the pines and finally coming for her. The tough Tootsie's special thing, the wasp priest's god of the lost. You could call it whatever you wanted, the lord of dark places, the emperor of understairs, every kid's worst nightmare. Whatever it was, it had finished teasing her. It was all done playing games. It would simply tear away the branches beneath which she was cowering and eat her alive. Coughing and shivering, all sense of reality and rationality gone, temporarily insane, in fact, Trisha put her arms over the back of her head and waited to be torn apart by the thing's claws and stuffed into its fangy mouth. She fell asleep that way, and when she woke in the early light of Tuesday morning, both of her arms were asleep from her elbows down and from the elbows down, and at first she couldn't bend her neck at all. She had to walk with her head cocked slightly to one side. I guess I won't have to ask either grandma what it's like. I guess I won't have to ask either grandma what it's like to be old, she thought as she squatted to pee. I guess that now I know. As she walked back to the pile of branches where she had slept, like a chipmunk in a burrow, she thought wryly, she saw that one of the other needle-filled hammocks, the one nearest hers, in fact, looked disturbed. The needles had been sprayed around and dug right down to the thin black earth in one place. So maybe she hadn't been insane in the dark of early morning after all, or not entirely insane, because later on, after she'd gone back to sleep, something had come. It had been right next to her, perhaps squatting and watching her sleep, wondering if it should take her now, and finally deciding not to, deciding to let her ripen for at least one more day, to let her sweeten like a checkerberry. Trisha turned in a circle, feeling a dim sense of deja vu, but not remembering she had turned exactly the same circle in almost exactly the same place only a few hours ago. She stopped when she came back to where she had started, coughing nervously into her hand. The cough made her chest hurt, a small dull pain that was very deep inside. She didn't exactly mind. The pain was warm, at least, and every other part of her felt cold this morning. "It's gone, Tom," she said. "Whatever it is, it's gone again. For a little while, anyway." "Yes," Tom said, "but it'll be back, and sooner or later you'll have to deal with it." "Let the evil of the day be sufficient thereof," Trisha said. That was one of her grandma McFarland's. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but thought that she sort of knew, and it seemed to fit this occasion. She sat on a rock beside her hammock and munched 3 big handfuls of berries and beech nuts, telling herself it was granola. The berries weren't as tasty this morning, a little tough, in fact, and Trisha guessed that they would be even less tasty come lunchtime. Still, she made herself eat all 3 handfuls, then went to the stream for a drink. She saw another one of those little trout in it, and although the ones she'd seen so far weren't much bigger than smelts or large sardines, she suddenly decided to try and catch one. The stiffness had begun working out of her body a little. The day was warming as the sun rose, and she had begun to feel a little better. Hopeful, almost. Maybe lucky, too. Even the cough had eased. Trisha went back to her tangled bed, extracted the remains of her poor old poncho, and spread it on one of the rock outcrops. She hunted for a stone with a sharp edge and found a good one near the place where the stream tumbled over the rounded lip of the bluff and into the valley below. This slope was easily as steep as the one she'd gone sliding down on the day she had gotten lost. That day seemed at least 5 years ago to Trisha, but she thought it would be a much easier descent. There were a lot of trees to hold on to. So I'm remembering a time. Is it? Oh, right. It was just a genuine fish salesman, right? That's so weird. I understand you thinking that it might have been drugs, because that's really strange. Uh, Trisha took her improvised cutting tool back to her poncho. Oh wait, spread. Did I read that already? Uh, spread on the rock like that of blah, 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 spread on the rock like that the poncho. Oh, sorry, I didn't read that. Okay. Trisha took her improvised cutting tool back to the poncho. Spread on the rock like that the poncho looked like a big blue paper doll, and sawed the hood like a big blue paper. I can't read. I can't read today. And sawed the hood off below the shoulder line. She doubted very much if she could actually catch a fish in the hood, but it would be amusing to try, and she didn't feel like trying the slope until she had limbered up a little more. She sang softly under her breath as she worked. First, the Boys to the Max song that had been in her head throughout. Then the Hansons' Bop. God. And then a snatch of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Mostly, however, she sang the one that went, um, who do you call when your windshield's busted? The chilly breeze of the night before had the chilly breeze of the night before had kept the worst of the bugs away. But as the day heated up, the usual cloud of tiny air show performers coalesced around Trisha's head. She barely noticed them, giving an occasional impatient wave only when they got too close to her eyes. Well, that too. I mean, it's just also strange. Like, who's just selling smelts to children outside? Um, when she had finished cutting the hood off the poncho, she held it upside down, dangling it and studying it with a judicious eye. Interesting. Undoubtedly too stupid to work, but sort of interesting just the same. Who do you call, baby? Who do you call when the damn thing's busted? Oh, yeah, Trisha chanted in a sing-songy whisper and walked over to the stream. She picked out two rocks protruding side by side from the water and planted her feet on them. She gazed down between her spread legs into the rushing current. The stream's pebble-packed bed was wavery, but otherwise clear. No fish right now. But so what? If you wanted to be a fisher girl, you had to be patient. Put your arms around me, 'cause I got a munch on you, Trisha sang, then laughed. Pretty goofy. Holding the hood upside down by the ragged shoulder material, she bent and dropped her improvised snare into the stream. The current pulled the hood back between her legs, but it stayed open, so that was all right. The problem was her position, back bent, butt in the air, head at the level of her waist. She wouldn't be able to hold this pose long, and if she tried to squat on the rocks, her sore, shaky legs would likely betray her and send her tumbling into the stream. A full-bodied dunk wouldn't help her cough. When her temple started to thud, Trisha compromised by bending her knees and lifting her upper body a little. This shifted her eyeline upstream, and she saw three quicksilver flashes. They were fish, all right, there was no doubt, coming toward her. If she'd had time to react, Trisha almost certainly would have jerked the hood and caught none of them. As it was, she had time for only a single thought, like underwater shooting stars. And then the silver glints were zipping between the rocks the rock she was standing on, and right beneath her. One of them missed the hood, but the other two swam right into it. Booyah! Trisha screamed. With that cry, it was as much dismay and shock as joy. Trisha bent forward again and grasped the lower edge of the hood. In doing so, she almost overbalanced and went into the stream anyway, but she managed to stay up. She lifted the hood, full of water and slopping over the sides, in both hands. It shifted out of shape as she stepped back to the bank, and more water slopped out, soaking the left leg of her jeans from hip to knee. One of the little trout went with it, twisting and flapping its tail in the air, then hitting the water and swimming away. Sugar tit! Trisha screamed, but now she was also laughing. As she worked her way up the bank, still holding the hood in front of her, she began coughing as well. When she reached a level place, she looked into the hood, sure she would see nothing. She just lost the other fish as well, must have. Girls didn't catch trout, even baby ones, in the hoods of their ponchos. She just hadn't seen its getaway. But the trout was still there, swimming around like a molly in a molly in a goldfish bowl. God, what do I do now? Trisha asked. This was a genuine prayer, both agonized and bemused. It was her body that answered, not her spirit. She had seen plenty of cartoons where Wile E. Coyote looked at Roadrunner and saw him turning into Thanksgiving dinner. She had laughed. Pete laughed. Even Mom laughed as she was watching. Trisha did not laugh now. Berries and beechnuts the size of sunflower seeds were all very well, but they weren't enough. Even when you ate them together and told yourself they were granola, they weren't enough. Her body's reaction to the 4-inch trout swimming in the blue hood was radically different. Not hunger exactly, but a kind of a cramp that centered in her body, but actually came from everywhere. An inarticulate cry, "Give me that!" which had little to do with her brain. It was a trout, just a little one, far below the legal limit. But whatever her eyes saw, her body saw. Whatever her eyes saw, her body saw dinner, real dinner. Trisha had only one clear thought as she took the hood over to the remains of the poncho, which was still spread on the outcrop. A paper doll without a head. A paper doll without a head now. I'll do it, but I'll never ever talk about it. If they find me, I'll tell them everything except how I fell into my own shit. End this. She acted with no planning or consideration. Her body brushed her mind aside and simply took over. Trisha spilled the contents of the hood onto the needle-covered ground and watched the little fishy flop about, strangling in the air. When it was still, she picked it up, put it on the poncho, and slid it up the belly with the stone she'd used to cut the poncho's hood. A thimbleful of watery, mucusy fluid ran out, more like thin snot than blood. Do we have to talk about this, Stephen King? Inside the fish, she could see tiny red guts. These Trisha levered out with a grimy thumbnail. Beyond them was a bone. She tried to pull it free and got about half of it. During all this, her mind tried to take over only once. You can't eat the head, it told her, its reasonable tone not really masking the horror and disgust beneath. I mean, the eyes, Trisha. The eyes. Then her body brushed it away again, and more roughly this time. When I want your opinion, I'll rattle the bars in your cage, Pepsi sometimes said. Trisha picked up the small flayed fish by the tail, carried it back to the stream, and dipped it to get rid of the pine needles and grime. Then she cocked her head back, opened her mouth, and bit off the trout's top half. Small bones crunched under her teeth. Her mind tried to show her the trout's eyes popping out of its head and onto her tongue in little dark dabs of jelly. She got one blurry look at this, and then her body banished her mind yet again, this time slapping instead of merely pushing. Mind could come back again when mind was needed. Imagination could come back when imagination was needed. Right now, body was in charge, and body said dinner, it's dinner. It may be morning, but dinner is served, and this morning we got fresh fish. The trout's top half went down her throat like a big swallow of oil with lumps in it. The taste was horrible and also wonderful. It tasted like life. Trisha dangled the trout's dripping lower half in front of her upturned face, pausing only long enough to pull another piece of bone out of it, whispering, "Dial 1-800-54-FRESH-FISH." She ate the rest of the trout, tail and all. When it was down, she stood looking across the stream, wiping her mouth and wondering if she was going to puke it all back up again. She'd eaten a raw fish, and although the taste of it was still coating her throat, she could hardly believe it. Her stomach gave a funny little lurch, and Trisha thought, "This is it." Then she burped, and her stomach settled again. She took her hand away from her mouth and saw a few fish scales gleaming on her palm. She wiped them on her jeans with a grimace, then walked back to where her pack lay. She stuffed the remains of her poncho and the severed hood, which had turned out to work pretty well, at least on the fish that were young and stupid, into it on top of her food supply, then reshouldered the pack. She felt strong, ashamed of herself, proud of herself, feverish, and a little nutsoid. I won't talk about it, that's all. I don't have to talk about it, and I won't. Even if I get out of here. And I deserve to get out, Trisha said softly. Anyone who can eat a raw fish deserves to get out. The Japanese do it all the time, said the tough Tootsie as Trisha set out once more along the side of the stream. So I'll tell them, Trisha said, if I ever get over there for a visit, I'll tell them. For once, the tough Tootsie seemed to have no comeback. Trisha was delighted. She made her way carefully down the slope and into the valley, where her stream bowled along through a forest of mixed firs and deciduous trees. These were thickly packed, but there was less underbrush and fewer bramble patches, and for most of the morning, Trisha got along well. There was no sense of being watched, and eating the fish had revitalized her strength. She pretended that Tom Gordon was walking with her, and they had a long and interesting conversation, mostly about Trisha. Tom wanted to know all about her, it seemed, her favorite classes at school, why she thought Mr. Hall was mean for giving homework on Fridays, all the ways Deborah Gilhooly had of being such a bitch, how she and Pepsi had planned to go trick-or-treating as Spice Girls last Halloween, and Mom had said Pepsi's mom could do whatever she wanted, but no 9-year-old girl of hers was going out trick-or-treating in a short skirt, high heels, and a cami top. Tom sympathized completely with Trisha's utter embarrassment. She was telling him about how she and Pete were planning to get their dad a custom-made jigsaw puzzle for his birthday from this company in Vermont that made them, or if that was too expensive, they would settle for a weed whacker. When she stopped suddenly, stopped moving, stopped talking. She studied the stream for almost a full minute, the corners of her mouth drooping, one hand waving automatically at the cloud of bugs around her head. The underbrush was creeping back in among the trees now. The trees themselves were stuntier, the light brighter. Crickets hummed and sang. No, Trisha said. No, No way, not again. The stream's new quietness was what had first distracted her from her fascinating conversation with Tom Gordon. Pretend people were such good listeners. The stream no longer babbled and brawled. That was because the speed of its current had slowed. Its bed was weedier than it had been above the valley's floor. It was beginning to spread out. If it goes into another swamp, I'll kill myself, Tom. An hour later, Trisha pushed her way wearily through a snarl of mixed poplars and birches, raised the heel of her hand to her forehead to crush a particularly troublesome mosquito, and then just left it there, hand to brow, the image of every human in history who is exhausted and doesn't know what to do or where to turn. At some point, the stream had spilled over its low banks and drowned a large area of open land, creating a shallow marsh of reeds and cattails. Between the vegetation, the sun glittered on standing water and hot pricks of light. Crickets hummed, frogs croaked, overhead 2 hawks cruised on stiff wings. Somewhere a crow was laughing. The marsh didn't look nasty like the bog of hummocks and drowned deadwood she'd waded through, but it stretched for at least a mile, and probably 2, before coming to a low, pine-covered ridge. And the stream, of course, was gone. Trisha sat down on the ground and started to say something to Tom Gordon and realized how stupid it was to be pretending when it was clear, and growing clearer with every passing hour, that she was going to die. It didn't matter how much walking she did or how many fish she managed to catch and choke down. She began to cry. She put her face in her hands, sobbing harder and harder. I want my mother, she yelled at the indifferent day. The hawks were gone, but over by that wooded ridge the crow was still laughing. I want my mother. I want my brother. I want my dolly. I want to go home. The frogs only croaked, reminding her of some story Dad had read her when she was little, a car stuck in the mud and all frogs croaking, too deep, too deep. How that had frightened her. She cried harder still, and at some point her tears, all these gosh damn tears, made her angry. She looked up, bugs spinning all around her, the hateful tears still spinning down her mucky face. I want my mother! I want my brother! I want to get out of here! Do you hear me? She kicked her legs up and down, kicked them so hard that one of her sneakers flew off. She knew she was doing a full-fledged tantrum now, the first one since she'd been 5 or 6, and didn't care. She threw herself onto her back, pounded her fists, and then opened them so she could tear handfuls of grass out of the ground and throw them into the air. I want to get the hell out of here! Why don't you find me, you stupid puppy shit assholes? Why don't you find me? I want to go home! She lay looking up at the sky, panting. Her stomach hurt, and her throat was sore from screaming, but she felt a little better, as if she had gotten rid of something dangerous. She put an arm over her face and dozed off, still sniffling. They actually spell her name like this in here for some reason. Hold on. It's like that. But yeah, I feel really bad for her. I hope that they get back on the the right, trail. I guess they kind of never were even on it. So I hope they get on the right trail. Um, where did it go? Oh, it was over here. Okay. When she woke up, the sun was over the ridge on the far side of the marsh. It was afternoon now. Tell me, Johnny, what do we have for our contestants? Well, Bob, we have another afternoon. It's not much of a prize, but I guess it's the best a bunch of puppy shit assholes like us can do. Trisha's head swam when she sat up. A squadron of large black moths unfolded their wings and went flying lazily across her field of vision. For a moment, she was sure she was going to faint. The feeling passed, but her throat was still sore when she swallowed and her head felt hot. She shouldn't have slept in the sun, she told herself, except sleeping in the sun wasn't the reason she felt this way. The reason was that she was getting sick. Trisha put on the sneakers she had kicked off, doing her stupid tantrum, then ate a handful of berries and drank some stream water from her bottle. She spied a cluster of fiddleheads growing at the edge of the marsh and ate them too. They were fading and a lot tougher than they were tasty, but she forced them down. With high tea over, she stood up and looked across the marsh again, this time shading her eyes from the sun. After a moment, she shook her head slowly and wearily, the gestures of a woman instead of a child, and an old woman at that. She could see the ridge clearly, and she was sure it was dry over there, but she couldn't face slogging through another quagmire with her Reeboks tied around her neck. Not even if this one was shallower than the other one, and not as nasty underfoot, not for all the late spring fiddleheads in the world. Why should she, with no stream to follow? She was as apt to find help, or another stream, in another easier direction. So thinking, Trisha turned fully north, walking along the east side of the marsh that sprawled across most of the valley's floor. She had done a great many things right since becoming lost, more than she ever would have guessed. But this was a bad decision, the worst she'd made since leaving the path in the first place. Had she crossed the marsh and climbed the ridge, she would have found herself looking down at Devlin Pond on the outskirts of Greenmount, New Hampshire. Devlin was small, but there were cottages on its south end and a camp road leading out to North Hampshire Route 52. On a Saturday or Sunday, Trisha would almost certainly have heard the burr of power boats on the pond as weekenders towed kids on water skis. After the 4th of July, there would have been power boats out there on any day of the week, sometimes so many that they had to weave to avoid each other. But this was midweek in early June. There was no one out on Devlin but a couple of fishermen with little 20-horse putt-putts, and Trisha consequently heard nothing but the birds and the frogs and the bugs. Instead of finding the pond, she turned toward the Canadian border and began walking deeper into the woods. Some 400 miles ahead was Montreal. Between it and her, not much. Seventh inning stretch is the next chapter. Give me a second. I'm just going to go and take something to drink because I am thirsty. And we will continue. By the way, guys, if you are enjoying, if you want to go ahead and press that like button just to go ahead and support the channel and support the stream, it is super appreciated and it helps a lot. Thank you guys for joining me. Again, I'm sorry that I started a bit late today. It's been really hard adjusting to the time change, honestly. It's just been hard to manage my time since that happened. I guess placing myself within, if that makes sense. It's like, okay, it's this time of day. I have this much time to do this much stuff. And what? Why the squirrel? Or chipmunk? Why? What's that about? So you found a chipmunk? Oh, okay. Thank you. It's a very cute chipmunk. Yeah. Mm, really my least favorite season. I don't understand people who like it. Um, okay. All right, so we are up to seventh inning stretch. The year before the separation and divorce, the McFarlands had gone to Florida for a week during Pete and Trisha's February school vacation. It had been a bad holiday, with the children too often glumly shelling together on the beach while their parents fought in the little beach house they had rented. He drank too much, he spent too much, you promised me you'd, why didn't you ever, yada yada yada, da 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 da. When they flew back, Trisha somehow got the window seat instead of her brother. The plane had descended toward Logan Airport through layers of overcast lumbering as carefully as an overweight old lady walking down a sidewalk where there are patches of ice. Trisha had watched, fascinated, with her forehead pressed to the window. They would be in a perfect world of white. They would be in a perfect world of white. There would be a flash of the ground or the slate gray water of Boston Harbor below them. More white. Then another flash of ground or the water. The 4 days which followed her decision to turn north were like that descent, mostly a cloud bank. Some of the memories she did have, she did not trust. By Tuesday night, the boundary between reality and make believe had begun to disappear. By Saturday morning, after a full week in the woods, it was all but gone. By Saturday morning, not that Trisha recognized it as Saturday when it came, by then she had lost track of the days. Tom Gordon had become her full-time companion, not pretend, but accepted as real. Pepsi Robichaud walked with her for a while, the two of them saying all their favorite boys and Spice Girls duets, and then Pepsi walked behind a tree and didn't come out on the other side. Trisha looked behind the tree, saw that Pepsi wasn't there, and understood after several moments of frowning, thought that she had never been there at all. Trisha had then sat down and cried. While she was crossing a wide, boulder-strewn clearing, a large black helicopter, the sort of helicopter the sinister government conspiracy guys used in the X-Files, came and hovered over Trisha's head. It was soundless except for the faintest pulse of its rotors. She waved to it and screamed for help, and although the guys inside must have seen her, the black helicopter flew away and never returned. She came to an old forest of pines, through which the light slanted in ancient dusty beams like sun rays falling through the high windows of a cathedral. This might have been on Thursday. From these trees hung the mutilated corpses of 1,000 deer, a slain army of deer crawling with flies and bulging with maggots. Wow. Trisha closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the rotting deer were gone. She found a stream and followed it for a while, and then it either quit on her or she wandered away from it. Before this happened, however, she looked into it and saw an enormous face on the bottom, drowned, but somehow still living, looking up at her and talking soundlessly. She passed a great gray tree like a hollow, crooked hand. From within it, a dead voice spoke her name. One night she awoke with something pressing down on her chest and thought that the woods, thought that the thing in the woods had finally come for her. But when she reached for it, there was nothing there and she could breathe again. On several occasions, she heard people calling for her, but when she called back, there was never any answer. Amid these clouds of illusion came vivid flashes of reality, like glimpses of the ground. She remembered discovering another berry patch, a huge one, splashed down the side of a hill, and refilling her pack while she sang, "Who do you call when your windshield's busted?" She remembered filling her water bottle and surge bottle from a spring. She remembered stumbling over a root and falling to the bottom of a wet little declivity where the most beautiful flower she had ever seen grew, waxy white and aromantic, graceful as bells. She had a clear memory of coming upon the headless body of a fox. Unlike the army of slain deer hanging from the trees, this corpse didn't go away when she closed her eyes and counted to 20. She was quite sure she saw a crow hanging upside down from a branch by its feet and cawing at her, and while that was probably impossible, the memory had a quality that many others, the one of the black helicopter, for instance, did not: a texture and a lucidity. She remembered fishing with her hood in the stream where she later saw the long drowned face. There were no trout, but she did manage to catch a few tatties. She ate the tatties, like tadpoles. She ate those whole, being careful to make sure they were dead before she did. She was haunted by the idea that they might live in her stomach and oh, yeah, that makes sense. That they might live in her stomach and turn into frogs there, so yeah, tadpoles. She was sick. She had been right about that, but her body fought the infection in her throat and chest and sinuses with remarkable tenacity. For hours at a time, she would feel feverish, hardly in the world at all. The light, even when it was dim and filtered by heavy tree cover, hurt her eyes, and she talked nonstop, mostly to Tom Gordon, but also to her mother, brother, father, Pepsi, and all the teachers she ever had, right back to Mrs. Garmond in kindergarten. She woke herself in the middle of the night, lying on her side with her knees curled to her chest, shaking with fever and coughing so hard she feared something inside her would rupture. But then, instead of getting worse, the fever would either fade or disappear entirely, and the headaches which accompanied it would lift. She had one night, it was Thursday, although she didn't know it, when she slept right through and woke almost refreshed. If she had coughed during that night, it wasn't hard enough to wake her. She picked up a patch of poison ivy on her left forearm, but Trisha recognized it for what it was and slathered it with mud. It didn't spread. Her clearest memories were of lying beneath heaps of branches and listening to the Red Sox while the stars glared coldly overhead. They won 2 out of the 3 in Oakland, with Tom Gordon getting saves in both wins. Mo Vaughn hit 2 home runs, and Troy O'Leary, one very cute baseball player in Trisha's humble estimation, hit 1. The games came through to her on WEEI, and although the reception grew a little worse each night, her batteries held up well. She remembered thinking that if she ever got out of this, she would have to write a fan letter to the Energizer Bunny. She did her part by turning the radio off when she got sleepy. Not once, even on Friday night when she was racked with chills and fever and watery bowels, did she go to sleep with the radio on. The radio was her lifeline, the games her life preserver. Without them to look forward to, she thought she would simply give up. The girl who had gone into the woods, almost 10 and big for her age, had weighed 97 pounds. The girl who came blundering half-blind up a piney slope and into a brushy clearing 7 days later weighed no more than 78. Her face was swollen with mosquito bites, and a large cold sore had bloomed on the left side of her mouth. Her arms were sticks. She hitched constantly at the waist of her loose jeans without realizing it. She was muttering a song under her breath. Put your arms around me, 'cause I gotta get next to you. And looked like one of the world's younger heroin addicts. She had been resourceful. She had been lucky with the weather, moderate temperatures, no rain since the day she'd gotten lost. And she had discovered deep and totally unexpected reserves of strength within herself. Now those reserves were almost gone. And in some part of her exhausted mind, Trisha knew it. The girl making her slow, weaving way through the clearing at the top of the slope was nearly finished. In the world she had left, a desultory remnant of the search went on. But she was nonetheless now presumed dead by most of those looking for her. Her parents had begun to discuss in a blundering and still unbelieving way whether they should have a memorial service or wait for the body to be found. And if they decided to wait, how long? Sometimes the bodies of those lost were never found. Pete said little, but he had grown hollow-eyed and silent. He took Moni Baloney into his room and sat her in the corner where she could look toward his bed. When he saw his mother looking at the doll, he said, "Don't you touch it! Don't you dare!" In that world of lights and cars and paved roads, she was dead. In this one, the one that existed off the path, the one where crows sometimes hung upside down from branches, she was close to it. But she kept on truckin'. That was one of her father's. Her course sometimes wavered a bit to the west or the east, but not often and not much. Her ability to keep moving steadily in one direction was nearly as remarkable as her body's refusal to give in completely to the infections in her chest and throat. Not as helpful, however. Her path took her slowly but steadily away from the larger concentrations of towns and villages, and deeper into New Hampshire's chimney. The thing in the woods, whatever it was, kept her company on her journey. Although she dismissed a great deal of what she felt and thought she saw, She never dismissed her sense of what the wasp priest had called the god of the lost, never chalked up the clawed trees or the headless fox, for that matter, to mere hallucination. When she felt that thing or heard it, several times she had heard breaking branches in the forest as it kept pace with her, and twice she had heard its low, inhuman grunt. She never questioned the fact of its actual presence. When the feeling left her, she never questioned the fact that the thing was really gone. She and it were tied together now. They would remain so until she died. Trisha didn't think that would be long now. Right around the corner, her mother would have said, except there were no corners in the woods. Bugs and swamps and sudden drop-offs, but no corners. It wasn't fair that she should die after fighting so hard to stay alive, but the unfairness didn't make her so angry now. It took energy to be angry. It took vitality. Trisha was nearly shot of both. Halfway across the new clearing, which was no different than a dozen others she had passed through, she began to cough. It hurt deep in her chest, made her feel as if there were a great big hook in there. Trisha doubled over, grabbed hold of a jutting stump, and coughed until tears popped out of her eyes and her vision doubled. When the coughing finally tapered off and stopped, she remained bent over at first, waiting for her heart to slow its fearful pounding. Also for those big black butterflies in front of her eyes to fold their wings and go back to wherever they came from. Good thing she'd had this stump to hold on to, or she would have fallen over for sure. Her eyes went to the stump, and her thoughts abruptly ceased. The first to come back was, I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing. It's another make-believe, another hallucination. She closed her eyes and counted to 20. When she opened them, the black butterflies were gone. But the rest was the same. The stump wasn't a stump. It was a post. On top, screwed into this gray and spongy old wood, was a rusty red ringbolt. Trisha grasped it, felt the old iron reality of it. She let go and looked at the flecks of rust on her fingers. She grasped it again, flicked it back and forth. The sense of deja vu swept her as it had when she had turned in a circle, only it was stronger now, and somehow associated with Tom Gordon. What? You dreamed it, Tom said. He was standing about 50 feet away with his arms folded and his butt leaned up against a maple tree, dressed in his gray road uniform. You dreamed we came to this place. I did? Sure, don't you remember? It was the team's off night. The night you listened to Walt. Walt? The name was only vaguely familiar, the significance of it totally lost. Walt from Framingham. The El Topo on the cell phone. She started to remember, and then the stars fell. Tom nodded. Trisha walked slowly around the post, never taking her hand off the ringbolt. She looked carefully at her surroundings and saw that she wasn't in a clearing at all. Not really. There was too much grass, the high green grass you saw in fields or meadows. This was a meadow, or it had been once, a long time ago. If you ignored the birches and the bushes and let your eyes see the whole thing, you couldn't mistake it for anything else. It was a meadow. People made meadows, just as people planted posts in the ground, posts with ring bolts on them. Trisha dropped to one knee and ran a hand up and down the post, lightly, mindful of the splinters. Halfway around it, she discovered a pair of holes in a twisted spring of old metal. She felt below it in the grass, found nothing at first, and dug deeper into the wiry undergrowth. Down there, caught an old hay and timothy. She found something else. Trisha had to use both hands to rip it free. It turned out to be an ancient rusty hinge. She held it up to the sun. A pencil-thin ray fell through one of the screw holes and put a brilliant pinhead of light on one cheek. Tom, she breathed. She looked toward where he had been, leaning back against the maple with his arms crossed, thinking he would be gone again. He wasn't, though, and although he wasn't smiling, she thought she saw a hint of a smile around his eyes and mouth. Tom, look! She held up the hinge. It was a gate, Tom said. A gate, she repeated rapturously. A gate! Something made by humans, in other words, folk from the magic world of lights and appliances and 612 insect repellent. This is your last chance, you know. What? She looked at him uneasily. It's the late innings now. Don't make a mistake, Trisha. Tom, you... But there was no one there. Tom was gone. Not that she had seen him disappear exactly because Tom had never been there in the first place. He was only in her imagination. What's the secret of closing? She had asked him. She couldn't remember exactly when. Establishing that it's you who's better, Tom had said, her mind perhaps recycling some half-heard comment from a sports show or maybe a post-game interview watched with her father, his arm around her shoulders, her head leaning against him. It's best to do it right away. Your last chance, late innings. Don't make a mistake. How can I do that when I don't even know what I'm doing? To that there was no answer, so Trisha once more walked around the post with her hand on the ring bolt, as slowly and as delicately as a Saxon girl in some ancient courting ritual of the maypole. The woods which enclosed the overgrown meadow revolved before her sight the way things did when you were on the merry-go-round at Revere Beach or Old Orchard. They looked no different from the miles of wood she had already been through, and which way? Which way was the right way? This was a post, but not a signpost. A post, not a signpost, she whispered, walking a little faster now. How can I know anything from it when it's a post, not a signpost? How can a numbwit like me... Excuse me. She had an idea then, and dropped back onto her knees. She banged one shin on a rock, started it bleeding. Hardly noticed. Maybe it was a signpost, because it had been a gate post. Trisha found the holes on the post again, the ones where the hinge screws had gone. She located herself with her feet to those holes, then crawled slowly away from the post on a straight line. One knee forward, then the other, then the first. Ow! She cried and yanked her hand out of the grass. That had hurt worse than barking her shin. She looked at her palm and saw little beads of blood oozing up through the caked dirt. Trisha leaned forward on her forearms, pushing aside the grass, knowing what had stabbed into her hand, needing to see it just the same. It was the ragged stump of the other gatepost, broken off about a foot out of the ground. And she'd really been quite lucky not to hurt herself any more than she had. A couple of the splinters sticking up from the post were a good 3 inches long and looked as sharp as needles. A little beyond the stump, buried in the white and wiry old grass underlying the June's aggressive new green, was the rest of the post. Last chance. Late innings. Yeah, maybe somebody expects an awful lot from a kid, she said. She unshouldered her pack, opened it, yanked out the remains of her poncho, and tore off one of the strips. This she knotted around the stump of the broken off gatepost, coughing nervously as she did. Sweat ran down her face. No Siams came to drink it. Some drowned. Trisha didn't notice. She stood up, reshouldering the pack, and stood between the remaining upright posts and the blue strip of plastic marking the downed one. Here's where the gate was, she said. Right here. She looked straight ahead in a northwest direction. Then she about-faced and gazed southeast. I don't know why anyone would put a gate here, but I know that you don't bother unless there's a road or a trail or a riding path or something. I want... Her voice trembled towards tears. She stopped, gulped them back, and then started again. I want to find the path. Any path. Where is it? Help me, Tom. Number 36 didn't reply. A jay scolded her, and something moved in the woods. Not the thing, just some animal. Maybe a deer. She had seen lots of deer over the last 3 or 4 days, but that was all. Before her, all around her, was a meadow so old that it could now pass for just another forest clearing unless you looked closely. Beyond this, she saw more woods, more clutches of trees she could not name. She saw no path. This is your last chance, you know. Trisha turned, walked northwest across the open space to the woods, then looked back to make sure she had a straight line. She had, and she looked forward again. Branches moved in a light breeze, casting deceptive dapples of light everywhere, creating what was almost a disco ball effect. She could see an old fallen log and went to it, slipping between the closely packed trees and ducking under the maddening interlacing branches, hoping... Oh, but it was a log, just a log, and not another post. She looked further and saw nothing. Heart thumping, breath coming in anxious, phlegmy little bursts. Trisha fought her way back to the clearing and returned to the place where the gate had been. This time she faced southeast and walked slowly once more to the rim of the woods. Well, here we go, Troop always said. It's late innings and the Red Sox need base runners. Woods. Nothing but woods, not so much as a game trail, at least not that Trisha could see, let alone a path. She pushed in a little further, still trying not to cry, knowing that very soon she wouldn't be able to help it. Why did the wind have to be blowing? How could you see anything with all those little puppy shit dots of sunlight spinning around? It was like being in a planetarium or something. What's that? Tom asked from behind her. What? She didn't bother turning. Tom's appearances no longer seemed especially miraculous to her. I don't see anything. Oh, sorry, what's that? Tom asked from behind her. What? I don't see anything. To your left, just a tiny bit, his finger pointing over her shoulder. That's just an old stump, she said. But was it? Or was she just afraid to believe it was a. I don't believe so, said number 36, and of course he had baseball player's eyes. I think that's another post girl. Trisha worked her way to it, and it was work. The trees were maddeningly thick here, and the bushes heavy, the going underfoot littered and treacherous. And yes, it was another post. This one had rusted nips of barbed wire running up the inside like sharp little bow ties. Trisha stood with one hand on its eroded top and looked deeper into the sun-dappled, deceptive woods. She had a dim memory of sitting in her room on a rainy day and working in an activity book Mom had brought her. There was a picture, an incredibly busy picture, and in it you were supposed to find 10 hidden objects: a pipe, a clown, a diamond ring, stuff like that. Now she needed to find the path. Please, God, help me find the path, she thought, and closed her eyes. It was the god of Tom Gordon she prayed to, not her father Subautable. She wasn't in Malden now, nor in Sanford, and she needed a god that was really there, one you could point to if you got the save. Please, God, please, help me in the late innings. She opened her eyes as wide as she could and looked without looking. 5 seconds went by. 5 seconds went by. 15 seconds. 30. And all at once it was there. She had no idea what exactly she was seeing. Perhaps simply a vector where there were fewer trees and a little more clear light, but perhaps only a suggestive pattern of shadows all pointing the same way. But she knew what it was. The last remains of a path. I can stay on it as long as I don't think about it too much, Trisha told herself, beginning to walk. She came to another post. This one leaning at an acute angle. One more winter of frost and freeze, one more spring of thaw, and it would fall and be swallowed in the next summer's grass. If I think about it too much or look too hard, I'll lose it. With that in mind, Trisha began following the few remaining posts of those planted by a farmer named Elias McCorkle in the year 1905. These marked the wood drag trail he had made as a young man, before the drink got him and he lost his ambition. Trisha went with her eyes wide, never hesitating. To do so would give thought a chance to creep in and likely betray her. Sometimes there would be a stretch where there were no posts, but she did not stop to hunt through the heavy underbrush for their remains. She allowed the light, the shadow patterns, and her own instinct to guide her. She walked in such steady fashion for the rest of the day, weaving through heavy clumps of trees and high bramble chokes with her eyes always on the faint trace of the path. She went on for a good 7 hours, and just when she was thinking she'd be sleeping again beneath her poncho, huddling there to keep the worst of the bugs at bay, she came to the edge of another clearing. 3 posts, leaning drunkenly this way and that, marched to the middle of it. The remains of a second gate still hung by the last of these posts, mostly held up by the thick twining of grass around its lower 2 crossbars. Beyond it, a pair of fading ruts grown over with grass and daisies headed south, curving back into the forest again. It was an old woods road. Trisha walked slowly past the gate and to where the road seemed to begin, or finish up. It all depended, she supposed, on which way you were pointing. She stood still a moment, then dropped to her knees and crawled along one of the ruts. And as she did it, she started crying again. She crawled across the old road's grassy crown, letting the tall grass tickle beneath her chin, and went up the other rut, still on her hands and knees. She crawled like a person who was blind, calling through her tears as she went. A road! It's a road! I found a road! Thank you, God! Thank you, God! Thank you for this road! Finally, she stopped, slipped off her pack, and lay down in the rut. This was made by wheels, she thought, and laughed through her tears. After a little while, she rolled over and looked at the sky. And I think that's where we'll stop for today. We're up to 8th inning. So we should have like 2 more chapters left, I think. I believe it, yeah. So we're on page 258. We have like 50 pages ish to the end of the book. So we'll definitely be able to finish next time. I'm going to go ahead and get a poll up, I hope like tonight, with our next potential books. And yeah. I hope you guys let's talk. Why am I jumping ahead of things? Let's talk about it. I think I'm only doing that because my throat is killing me from reading. We did indeed find a road. I'm happy. I didn't know how this was gonna go. I didn't know if Stephen King was gonna let a child die or not. I mean, he's definitely killed fictional children before, so yeah. Right, she could die in 50 pages. It's possible. Ominous. So it's really interesting to hear that she sort of like went crazy for like her own good. If that makes sense. Like it was what she needed to do to survive, is just kind of like abandon all sense of reality in some ways. And it makes sense because mindset plays a large part of things in terms of like perseverance and stuff. Yeah, Stephen King is Stephen King, so that's true. No, you won't be reading that. I don't think we'll be doing that. I know you have. And I'm pretty sure you like it too, right? You just know not for me. Oh, I thought you liked it. Oh, okay. Strange. I don't tend to love books that traumatize me. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, trauma for the characters is one thing. Like, that's not always terrible, but for myself, not so much. I've got enough on my own. I don't need to willingly give myself more. Have we been going for only a shorter time today? I'm sorry if we're going at a shorter, like if this is a shorter video. I checked the timer and it looks like, or not the timer, but the like, well, I guess it's like a timer for the live, and it's like an hour and 19 minutes. My throat is just killing me from reading. I don't know why. Yeah, I mean, What do you mean? You wonder what will happen to her parents, like, if they'll, like what do you mean? Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope so. So, like, her parents don't seem to fight so much anymore now that they're not together, but I hope that her, like, brother and her mother will maybe fight a little bit less. I hope that her I don't hope that her parents get together over this, because these are very extenuating, like, these are very special circumstances, and I don't think it's enough to, like, properly actually save a marriage. Um, if, like, if they'd wanted, like, if it helps prepare their relationship in terms of, like, not like a romantic relationship, but just a relationship in the purest sense of the word, like, that now they're in contact, maybe if they were on bad terms before, they're not on bad terms, they're, like, at least speaking to one another and stuff. Yeah, like, that is good, and I'll be happy about that, but it wouldn't feel realistic to have them get back together, just with this. If if she gets out alive, which we don't know is gonna happen. As Kayla has mentioned, there are 50 pages left, so child death is still a possibility. I would like to think that she will, but we'll see. Ooh. Well, does anybody else have anything else that they want to talk about? I don't know. I still don't know. Cuz I was of the camp that it is a real thing. There's certain things that definitely do seem to be like kind of like convincing on that personally. Um but it's also possible that she could just be like hallucinating or imagining. Although again, so like she's doing a lot of imagining like now. Um but she seems to have like actually like lost her sense for the most part right now, and that's why. Whereas before she hadn't. So, can you I know you can't tell us obviously if it is real or not, but can I ask if we will get an answer to it like in the book? And like you can either say you could say yes or you could say that. That's what I was going to say is the third option of responding. Okay. Fine. Well, I think that's it for today then. Again, unless we have any other things to talk about or questions. Mhm. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Like, in some cases, it actually feels like an extension of it, honestly. And, like, for me, even not reading having read the book of it, I can kind of understand that more from reading this, like, just that fear. Yeah, but we'll see. Don't know much about oh, do you mean it, like, with a capital? With a capital I? Yeah, yeah, it's not something I wanna read. Mhm. Not something I wanna read. Bad enough that I had to see the movie for my 7th grade media class. I remember the first term of that media class was so much fun, and we watched, like, Spirited Away and Treasure Planet and Harry Potter, and, like, that was great. And then the second term, we watched Lost Boys, which was fine. Lost Boys was actually okay. It and The Ring, terrible term. We were so lucky to get that class though, because basically what it is like it was just the whole class you were just watching movies until like once everybody settled down, they turned the movie on and then it went until the end of the period. And there was what's it called? My teacher would ask questions about it sometimes. Like there were tests, but it wasn't like often that we got those. And I think it was a lot of times if we misbehave that we get them. And the first strike of misbehaving, no, no reports. The first strike of misbehaving was that he moved us from the flat screen TV without glare on it to the older TV that he had, which wasn't so great in quality. Had like a smaller screen, was one of those curved screen TVs. It was really funny to think back on. That was the punishment. It's like we're still watching movies, we're just not watching it in as great a television. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for coming out and listening to me today. Of course, we will be doing it again next Sunday at 5, hopefully 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm sorry that I have not been great with my consistency with that. I hope to get better again in the future. We will be doing that. And yeah, so until then, have a great weekend, a great rest of the weekend, and a great week. And go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. If you have anything to say that you want immortalized in time, obviously the comments are the place to do that. If you have a question after the fact, that's the place to do that. And please just leave a comment for support. It honestly really helps me and lets me know that you guys are listening and watching and enjoying. And that just it brings me a lot of joy and helps me continue to keep up with this. Until next time, this has been Sky. Bye bye.